Since the launch of Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter World Iceborne, I have been making build videos to help hunters take on the challenging hunts in the game. But now the best of the best builds are all done, things don't feel as challenging anymore. So with that, I present to you the Budget Build Challenge. For this video, we will be looking at a budget build for the bow. Now, what is the Budget Build Challenge? Well, it's where we take a basic endgame vanilla budget build and test it against some of the hardest hunts in the game to see how it performs. Of course, there are some self-imposed rules for these budget builds and the Budget Build Challenge. So firstly, the builds can only use armor and weaponry below Ruina Nergigante. So yes, they can use Gold Rathian and Silver Rathalos gear, but they cannot use anything from Ruina Nergigante or anything that was added post-launch of Monster Hunter World Iceborne. So no Rajang, no Fatalis, no Elatrion, so on and so forth. On top of that, the next rule is that the builds cannot contain any tier 4 decorations, so none of the double decorations. They can only contain decorations that are easily farmable from high rank quests, namely the Greatest Jagras. And the third rule is that this challenge will feature 3 hunts. One against Tempered Ruina Nergigante via the Ode to Destruction quest, then one against one of the normal additional monsters added, so that's Frostfang Barioth, Rajang, Furious Rajang, Raging Brachydios, those type of monsters. And then finally, the last challenge hunt will be against either Elatrion or Fatalis, depending on the build we are actually using. So let's get into this. Now, the bow in Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter World Iceborne was pretty much my favourite weapon. I like to think that I was efficient enough with each of the weapons in the game, but this is one of the ones that I enjoyed the most. It's a superb DPS weapon that relies on a player's skill to evade attacks for survivability. This, coupled with it being one of the weapons that can really make use of elemental damage in the game, it made it a fun DPS ranged weapon to use. Now, for the budget build in question, we're going for an all-round DPS build that leans slightly more to elemental damage than raw damage. Nonetheless, it does have some raw damage options, and the weaponry and charms in this build are highly interchangeable if you want to switch between the various elements in the game. So for this build, you'll need the Rimeguard Helm Alpha, the Rex Roar Mel Alpha, Rex Roar Braces Alpha, Rimeguard Coil Alpha, and the Garuga Greaves Beta. For my charm, I'm using the Wormsbane Charm 5. Of course, if you were using a different weapon with a different element, you'd replace the Wormsbane Charm to match whatever new element you were using. And for my weapon, I'm using the Death Bow Val Veloz, which is the Black Veil Val Hazak bow. This has a health regen augmentation, affinity increase augmentation, and then elemental up augmentation attached to it. Of course, you can replace this bow to use other bows that have different elements, but if you do so, make sure you're switching to a bow that has at least one tier 1 decoration slot in it, so you can max out the elemental skill for whatever element you are using. As for the specialist tools, I've gone for Rocksteady and Temporal Mantles, as this build will be tested against Fatalis later on. So when it comes to the decorations, you've got a few to play around with, but unfortunately the bow is quite a decoration and skill heavy weapon. So for this build, I've gone for a Critical Jaw, which is kind of optional for a 1 point in crit boost. I've then gone for Dragon Jaw to max out the dragon attack of this build. Of course, if you were using a different weapon with a different element, you would replace the Dragon Jaw to match whatever new element you were using. I've then gone for a Force Shot Jaw for a point in the normal shot skill, the Mighty Bow Jaw for points in the Bow Charge Plus build. This could be considered a rare decoration, but to be honest, it can be easily farmed by taking on high rank quests, so you don't have to farm it solely in Master Rank, and this is a Master Rank budget build. On top of that, you can also craft the Mighty Bow Jaw at the Elder Melder now, although it is a little bit expensive and normally available only once you reach endgame. But anyway, on top of that, I've gone for Physique Jaws for points in the Constitution skill, a Spread Jaw for a point in the Power Shot skill, Protection Jaw to max out Divine Blessing, and then finally Tenderizer Jaws to max out Weakness Exploit. As for the jaws in the mantles, these are down to personal preference, but as we are using this build against Fatalis, I've got Heavy Artillery Jaws here to max out the Heavy Artillery skill, although if you weren't going against Fatalis, you can replace these with whatever you see fit. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You'll have a raw attack of 336 with 26% affinity. This can be potentially 75% when you take into account weakness exploit as well. You have a dragon rating of 640 with average Elder Seal. Of course, if you were using a different weapon with a different element, this dragon rating would be replaced with a different elemental rating. And you also have access to close range, power, and sleep coatings with the bow we're using. As for your defense, you have an okay defense of 1017 that is strong against fire and ice, but unfortunately weak to the other elements. Now, when it comes to the skills, first of all, you have Dragon Attack at level 6, which increases the dragon rating and thus dragon damage of this build. As always, if you were using a different weapon with a different element, you would replace Dragon Attack at level 6 to match whatever new element you were using. You also have Attack Boost at level 5, Attack Boost is a skill that increases the raw attack of a build, and at level 4 or above it also grants us a bonus 5% base affinity. You have Health Boost at level 3, allowing our health to get to that maximum of 200. You have Weakness Exploit at level 3. Weakness Exploit is a skill that increases our affinity so long as we're attacking monster weak points, and should these weak points be tenderized through Clutch Claw attacks first, this bonus affinity is even greater. Weakness Exploit at level 3 can potentially provide us a bonus 50% extra affinity. Anyway, next up you have Constitution at level 3, which reduces the stamina cost of certain moves, and as pretty much all of the bow attacks rely on stamina, Constitution at level 3 topped up with Dash Juice is what you want to strive for maximum efficiency when it comes to your stamina. Anything more is just overkill and won't be effective. Anyway, next up is Divine Blessing at level 3, which is a skill that gives us a chance at taking reduced damage when we take a hit from a monster. You have Critical Eye at level 2, which increases the base affinity of this build. You have Coalescence level 2, which is a byproduct of the armor we're wearing, but it can still be useful. Basically, when we remove a status or blight from our hunter, we'll gain increased raw attack and elemental attack. You also have Normal Shots at level 1, increasing the damage of our normal arrow shots. This doesn't apply to coatings as always, and the increase in damage is only applied to the raw portion of a bow shot, not the elemental portion. Basically increases the damage of shots performed with R2 or RT. You'll also have Power Shots at level 1, which increases the damage of power shots, so shots performed with circle or B. Again, it doesn't apply to power coatings, just the actual shots you perform with the bow. And once again, this only applies to the raw portion of an attack, not the elemental portion. You also have Critical Boost at level 1. Critical Boost is a skill that gives us increased damage when our attacks crit a monster, but Critical Boost only increases the damage of the raw portion of an attack, not the elemental portion. You also have Flinch Free at level 1, a byproduct of the gear we're wearing, but is useful when you're playing multiplayer, as it prevents knockback from your allies, as well as minor knockbacks from monsters as well. You also have Bow Charge Plus at level 1, increasing the amount of times we can actually charge up the bow. This also means that we can fire an extra time in quick succession, ultimately leading to more damage. So before starting to dash dance with the bow, you'd fire the bow 4 times consecutively, or hold it down and let it charge up 4 times instead. And then finally, when you're wearing your mantles, you'll have Heavy Artillery at level 2, increasing the damage when we're using cannons and ballistas. Finally, for the set bonuses, you only have one of them, which is the Velcana Divinity Critical Element, which works like Critical Boost but for the elemental portion of an attack. So when our attacks crit a monster, they'll deal increased elemental damage. So there we have it, that is the budget build for the bow we will be using for this budget build challenge. As you can see, it is a straightforward all-round DPS build for the bow in all honesty. It doesn't have the highest affinity rating, but nonetheless, it should be efficient enough to bring down monsters. But every build out there has pros and cons. When it comes to the pros for this build, is its decent damage output, combining elemental damage with the raw attack damage as well as the affinity based skills we were able to put on this build. We should be able to take on monsters quite effectively and efficiently. On top of that, this build has quality of life skills. Health boost, constitution, divine blessing and more. These will all make the hunts feel a little bit more easier than they are. And then finally for the pros is that this build is interchangeable with different bows of different elements. You only have to change the bow, the charm and one single decoration in order to use any element in the game. But unfortunately there are cons. One of the biggest cons for this build is it's a dual heavy build unfortunately, from the Mighty Bow Duel to the Spread Shot Duel to the 4-shot duel. Even though this is technically a budget build, as we are not using any tier 4 decorations, this still can be a little bit demanding and is a con nonetheless. And the other con for this build, which is more of a con for the bow in general, which is it takes 2 clutch claw attacks to tenderize monster body parts. This can be alleviated slightly with the shaver decoration, but that is technically an Iceborne high rank decoration, so we are not using that in this build. But with our build in hand, we now move on to the fun part of the video where we review how the hunts went. First of all, the hunt against Tempered Ruina Nergigante via the Ode to Destruction event quest. Now this is pretty much one of my most fun fights in the game, and in all honesty this bow build was perfectly capable of doing this hunt. Rarely did I have any issues. On top of that, with the bow having a decent raw attack rating as well as its elemental rating, it was able to stun Nergigante quite a few times, break its spikes and overall bring it down quite quickly. On top of that, even though I have issues with the clutch claw attack with the bow and having to perform it twice in order to actually tenderize a monster body part, thanks to being able to stagger Nergigante quite effectively and more importantly quite often, it always gave me an opportunity to perform clutch claw attacks and refresh the tenderizing effect on the monster's body parts. And this for me made the fight overall quite fun and is a great example of a hunt that shows why I love the bow and why I love Monster Hunter. Which brings us on to the second hunt, which was against Furious Zhang. Now for this hunt I had to make one change. I switched out the bow to use the basic Barioth bow. and as such I switched all the charms and jewels to max out ice attack instead of dragon attack, but apart from that the build was exactly the same. Now I was a little bit worried about going up against Rajang, but the bow is quite a fast-paced weapon, so it should be able to match Furious Rajang's speed. And I wasn't disappointed. Thanks to understanding the monster's attack patterns, I was easily able to keep my distance from the creature and try my best at hitting its weak points. I will say when it came to tenderizing Rajang, I didn't focus as much as I did when compared to Ruina Nergigante, as you cannot technically tenderize Furious Rajang's head, only its arms, and its head being the weakest part, it meant that I didn't have to worry about performing the clutch claw attack over and over again. But the hunt went on as normal. I used as many tools available to me, even going as far as to trap the monster once to try to slow it down and perform as much damage as I could. This ultimately led to a smooth hunt with very little issues, which brings us on to the third and final hunt, which was against the Black Dragon Fatalis. Now I was a little bit worried about this hunt when it came to the bow. Recent testing via live streams gave me doubt when it came to how this build would perform against it. On top of that, again, this build lacked Part Breaker, so I was worried when it came to breaking the monster's horns and powering it down. But with that, I made sure I was using the heavy artillery skill with the mantles we have, and every possible opportunity I would focus fire the ballistas and cannons on the monster's head to try to break them at least once before it enters the final phase. I was also a little bit worried because we didn't have Divine Blessing at level 5 and we didn't have Evade Window at all. So when it came to survivability, you really had to pay attention to the monster's movements and try your best not to get hit. Divine Blessing at level 3 at least helped a little bit when it came to some attacks, but the best defense is actually knowing what the monster's going to do. Nonetheless, I went into this hunt, I focused fire with the ballistas, cannons and more, used everything in my arsenal to quickly break the monster's horns at least once before the final phase, and thankfully I was able to do that. It did help in some respects, the bow being a ranged weapon meant that I could attack the horns even when the head was up high when compared to melee weapons. I will say I had to go back to camp a few times to restock my power coatings as well as health potions, but overall this build performed adequately well against Fatalis. In all honesty, this should have been a flawless hunt. When I say flawless, I mean I shouldn't have carted once, but unfortunately towards the end I got a little bit greedy because time was getting on. I saw the skull above the monster's head in the minimap and I was just going for the kill. I shouldn't have died here in all honesty, and that unfortunately is on me. So eventually this build was able to bring down Fatalis, albeit it did it quite slowly, but to be honest, when you're using a budget build, you're not going to be completing these tough challenges exceedingly quick. For me personally, I was just happy that it was able to do it. And once again shows that you don't always have to have the best of the best builds to do tasks in Monster Hunter. So there we have it. That was the budget build challenge using the bow. Hopefully this showed you that limited builds can do most tasks in the game. Also, I'm sure that you could adapt this build to make it better for certain hunts. For example, adding Part Breaker when taking on Fatalis would probably make things a lot easier. So adapt the build to your needs and what you see fit. And until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you the budget build challenge using the bow in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.